Hi, welcome to BAL, Building Athletic Lifestyles. I'm Neil. Today we're going to be talking a bit about the difference between exercising and training. This isn't just a case of semantics, there is some method in the madness, and that will become apparent as we go through. So just to clarify a few things, if you're sat at home doing nothing, moving is usually better than doing nothing, which is where the exercising comes in. That's why exercise classes exist. That's where you can go to do something instead of just doing nothing. Yeah, getting you moving is going to be better for your health and fitness in the long run. Good, but the difference between just exercise and having that aimless movement, where it is better than doing no movement, but the difference between that and training is the direction, the intention, the outcome. Yeah, if you're training, you've got a goal that you're working towards. There's a certain point of position that you're trying to achieve. Now, that is important to then allow you to measure your progress, and that's where principles like progressive overload come. And if you missed the video on progression, I'll pop a link down below on that one as well, that you can find that as well. So all of the as well. So if you've got that goal to work towards, you've then got a measurable step towards progressing there. So breaking down training a little bit more, we've got practicing, training, and competing. So it's not a case of semantics. They are different tiers in terms of how I'm going to justify them to you. So practicing is low intensity, low heart rates. It's where you're working more on skill acquisition than anything else. You've got minimal levels of fatigue, but instead you're focusing a lot on the quality of your movements, the quality of the movement patterns you're perfecting. Then you've got training. So this is going to be at higher heart rates, moderate intensities, anywhere up to sort of like 85% of your max effort. So this is probably where we want to spend a lot of the time if you're training multiple times through the week, because it allows us to put enough stress on the body to create an overreach that we then have to adapt to. I'll explain that a little bit more as we go, but it's also not going to put you in such a hole that you can't recover from it as well. This is a great way also to work through multiple modalities and different energy systems as well. Touch more complex, but maybe we can cover that at a later date. So then we've got competing, anything up from that as well. So this is where we're getting towards those high heart rates, that max effort, where we're working towards that red line. You know, you're a sweaty mess on the floor by the end of it. Yeah. So the thing to also note with that as well is when you're competing, when you're pushing yourself that hard, you've got the greatest amount of stress on the body to adapt to. But at the same time, generally, when we're under those high stages of fatigue, we also then see some breakdowns in form as well, which increases risk of injury as well in the long run. Good, so now we've got the sort of the definitions out of the way. You've got an idea of how this all ties together and the words I'm going to be using. Why does it even matter? So there's this little graph here that I've drawn up on the left. I was never a great artist, but hopefully you'll understand. So the x-axis going along the bottom is time, and then you've got up the side, you've got your performance, your ability to perform. So this is very much about a principle called overreaching. So when we train, when we're in the gym or when we're doing a workout, we're placing stress on the body. So that stress will have an impact on the body that we then have to adapt to, and hence how we get stronger, fitter, whatever it may be from that point. So depending on the amount of stress you put on the body will depend on how much adaptation then occurs. So it's the SAID principle, specific adaptation to imposed demands. If you missed the video on progression, I'll drop a link down to that below. You can go and find that too. So I've color-coded it for you here as well. And I want you to focus more on not necessarily the length of time, because there's no real scale to this. It's more an illustration of the amount of depth that we get on that initial overreach. So if you look at the difference between your black, your blue, and your red, you'll see that competing has the greatest overreach. That's where your ability to perform after that session is actually going to be at its lowest, because you've worked to that max effort. You've really pushed yourself. You're the sweaty mess on the floor. If I asked you to do it again, it's always going to be a lot worse. Yeah, makes sense? So from that, you then swap to the practice. If you're doing low intensity, low heart rate work, actually you haven't put a lot of stress on the body. You may have got a great degree of skill acquisition, so you may be more proficient at a movement, but actually you'd be pretty fresh and ready to go again. This is important when it comes to how many times through the week you are training. If you're only training a couple of times through the week, you can afford to push a lot harder because you've got the time to then recover. So after we've had that initial dip in performance, we then come back up as we recover from that. And the theory of specific adaptation to imposed demands is we get more proficient in that adaptation and we go beyond our initial point of performance. We finish in a place higher than that. Now, if we don't give ourselves enough time to recover, if our next training session is before we've fully recovered from that dip, we actually never get to that new point of performance before we dip down again. So this principle of overreaching is extremely important in terms of making progress. But how we balance it through the week is going to be individual specific. So your intensities you should be training at is going to be dependent on the goals that you're working towards. If it's sport specific, then things like practice is going to be extremely important, because there's going to be certain movements that are sport specific that you need to get more proficient at to improve your ability to perform on the day. but also in terms of you may need to taper for certain game days or things like that too. If we're just going to the gym twice a week, then yes, you can sell yourself out and compete a bit more because you've got the time in between to fully recover from it. Most people will rattle around the training mark a bit more, or should be rattling around the training mark a bit more, because it allows you enough time to make progress but also still to recover. Good. If you're unsure about how to structure this as well, that is where talk to someone that knows what they're doing. Find a personal trainer, something like that, where they can give you that structure to then follow. The case in point, the classic example I've got of this is actually, it's not from a client of mine, it's from a friend of mine who's training, he was training about 5 times a week. Sometimes it was 4, but generally probably averaged close to the 5 marks a week. He was absolutely selling himself out in the gym every single time. He was a sweaty mess on the floor every single session. And he found that he made a lot of progress to start off with. And then actually very soon he started to plateau and he was just feeling tired and depleted and couldn't push himself as hard anymore and actually stopped making progress. That's when he came and spoke to me about it, and all we had to do was rein him back in a bit. He was competing every single session. He was putting himself in these massive holes after every session and not giving himself enough time to then recover from it. So all we had to do was bring him back a little on some of those sessions, and suddenly the progress starts to creep back up again. Yeah, because even though we get these dips in performance, if you then bring that further and further back, if we go dip down, get a little higher, dip down, get a little higher, dip down, get a little higher. You go far enough back from that image, the line is just going to be a general trend straight up, yeah? Which is what we want. We don't want to be plateauing or even going down if you're not giving yourself adequate time to recover. What is that adequate time to recover will depend on the stress in your life, the sleep that you're getting, your nutrition as well. So it's going to be a largely individual specific question, but it is one that we should be asking ourselves, because if we don't know these things, if you're constantly pushing yourself but you've no idea really if you're making progress, then what's the point? You're exercising at that point. We're not even training. One thing that does get overlooked quite a lot is the practicing. That's because it's not sexy. Doing your clean and jerks with a broom handle isn't going to draw a crowd or anything like that. But it is really important in terms of minimizing your risk of injury and also giving you those opportunities to recover where you're still moving, you're still doing something, you're still making progress without putting yourself in a hole that you can no longer recover for. So again, what you're practicing on should be specific to yourself. It'll depend on the goal you're working towards. If it's sport specific, that's quite easy to then find what those should be. If it's less sport specific, then actually taking those times to work on small things, whether it's your squat patterns or your hinge patterns at home in your living room whilst you're watching TV in the evening on those days that you're resting, or doing whatever it may be. Find a way that works for you to still practice as well, because your quality of movement matters, because it matters with how efficiently you move to get the most bang for your buck for when you're pushing yourself in the gym, but it also minimizes your risk of injury going in the long run. I hope this has helped. I hope this has sort of helped you understand as well. When it comes to that skill acquisition, doing 6 things 1,000 times is always going to be better than doing 1,000 things 6 times. Spend time practicing. It isn't sexy, but it will be worth it in the long run. I might have nicked that from Bruce Lee, I'm not too sure, or someone else. I'm not sure. I've got it from somewhere, but I couldn't tell you where. I hope this has helped. If you've got any questions, please drop them down below and I'll get back to you from there, and I'll see you in the next one.